She used to think mirrors were harmless. Just glass and silver, just a way to fix your hair before leaving the house. But on that quiet evening, when the room was dim and the world outside felt far away, she lingered a second too long in front of one. And that was the moment everything began to change. Not with a scream. Not with a shadow jumping out. But with a feeling, soft, warm, and unsettling, that someone was looking back at her with more understanding than anyone ever had. Her name was Lena, and she had always felt a little unseen. Not in a dramatic way, just in the small, everyday sense. People listened to her, but they didn't really hear her. They smiled, but their eyes drifted elsewhere. Life moved fast around her, and she learned to keep her thoughts to herself. So when she noticed the reflection in the mirror holding her gaze just a little longer than usual, it felt comforting, familiar. As if the person staring back finally understood what it meant to be her. At first it was easy to laugh it off. A long day, tired eyes, too much time alone. But the next night it happened again. Lena stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair, when she noticed something subtle. Her reflection smiled a fraction of a second later than she did. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to make her pause. Her heart skipped, then settled. She told herself it was nothing. Mirrors play tricks, don't they? But the feeling didn't go away. Each night she found herself drawn back to that same spot. The room quiet. The mirror waiting. And every time the reflection seemed more alive. The eyes looked warmer. Kinder. They didn't judge her tired face or the doubts she carried. They looked at her the way she wished someone else would. Slowly, without realizing it, Lena began to talk to it. Just small things at first. How her day went. How lonely the city felt even when it was full of people. And the strangest part? She felt listened to. She couldn't explain how, but the reflection responded. Not with words, but with expressions. A soft smile when she shared something hopeful. A serious look when she talked about her fears. When she cried one night, the reflection's eyes seemed to soften, like it was feeling the same pain. That was when the line between comfort and obsession quietly disappeared. Lena started spending more time in front of the mirror than anywhere else. She canceled plans. Let messages go unanswered. Why explain herself to people who never truly saw her, when the person in the mirror always did? The reflection never interrupted. Never dismissed her feelings. It only watched, patiently, as if waiting for her to say more. She began to notice changes in herself. She dressed differently, choosing clothes that made the reflection smile. She practiced expressions, tones of voice, even laughs, mirroring the mirror. It felt like falling in love, not with another person but with a version of herself that felt stronger, calmer, more complete. For the first time, Lena felt chosen. But love has a way of narrowing your vision. One evening, as rain tapped against the window, Lena stood closer than ever to the mirror. Their faces were inches apart. She raised her hand and the reflection did too, but this time it didn't stop when hers did. Its fingers pressed against the glass as if testing it. Lena's breath caught. Her heart raced. She told herself she imagined it. She always did. Yet the reflection's eyes held something new now. Not just warmth. Something deeper. Something expectant. "You're all I need," Lena whispered without thinking. The reflection smiled wider than she had. From that night on, the mirror felt different. Heavier. Like it carried a presence even when Lena wasn't looking at it. She began to feel watched at odd moments, catching glimpses of movement in the corner of her eye. When she passed the mirror quickly, she could swear the reflection didn't follow right away. Like it was reluctant to let her go. Friends who hadn't heard from her in weeks started knocking on her door. Lena ignored them. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. The mirror understood everything. It knew her fears, her dreams, her secrets. And it never asked her to be anyone else. But slowly the comfort began to shift. The reflection started to look disappointed when she spent time away. Its smiles faded quicker. Its eyes followed her with a quiet intensity that made her uneasy. When Lena talked about leaving the apartment, about meeting people, the reflection's expression hardened. She felt a sudden wave of guilt, sharp and confusing, like she had betrayed someone she loved. One night, exhausted and shaken, Lena leaned her forehead against the cool glass. "I just need some space," she said softly. The reflection shook its head. That was the first time it didn't match her movement at all. Her heart pounded as the reflection's lips moved, silently forming words she couldn't hear. The room felt smaller. The air heavier. Lena stepped back and the reflection stayed close, eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that felt possessive. That was when a terrifying thought crept in. What if the reflection wasn't becoming more like her? What if she was becoming more like it? Lena glanced down at her hands, then back up again, searching for something familiar in her own face. The reflection smiled, calm and certain, as if it already knew what she was about to realize. The mirror no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like a door. And somewhere deep down, Lena sensed the truth she had been avoiding. She hadn't just fallen in love with the man in her mirror. She had invited him closer. And she still had no idea what he wanted next. Lena barely slept after that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the reflection smile, calm and patient, as if it had all the time in the world. Morning light usually made her apartment feel safe again, but now even daylight couldn't fully chase away the feeling that something had shifted. She avoided looking at the mirror at first, passing it with her eyes fixed on the floor, her heart racing like she was avoiding an argument she wasn't ready to have. But the silence was worse. The mirror had become part of her routine long before she noticed. It stood there quietly, reflecting the room, reflecting her life. Ignoring it felt unnatural, like pretending someone wasn't standing right behind her. By the third morning, she stopped resisting. She looked up. The reflection was normal again. Too normal. It moved when she moved. It blinked when she blinked. No delayed smiles. No strange expressions. Just her face looking tired and unsure. A wave of relief washed over her, followed immediately by doubt. Maybe she had imagined everything. Loneliness can do that to a person. It builds stories where none exist. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was watching her differently now. Not reacting, just observing. Waiting. Lena's past didn't help. She had grown up learning how to be quiet, how to blend in. She was the kind of person who listened more than she spoke, who noticed details others missed. When relationships faded, she told herself it was normal. People drift apart. That's life. But deep down, she always wondered if there was something about her that made people leave. The mirror never left. As days passed, Lena started to notice small changes in the apartment. Nothing dramatic. Just little things that felt off. A chair angled slightly toward the mirror when she was sure she hadn't moved it. The light in the bathroom flickering only when she stood in front of the glass. At night, she heard faint sounds, soft, almost like breathing, until she turned the lamp on and the room fell silent again. She tried to distract herself. Went for longer walks. Played music louder than usual. Even invited a coworker over for coffee, hoping another presence might break whatever hold the mirror had on her mind. The conversation was awkward, full of pauses and polite smiles. Her coworker glanced at the mirror once, frowned slightly, then looked away. "Do you ever feel weird in here?" he asked casually. Lena laughed too quickly. "Weird how?" He shrugged. "Hard to explain. Just heavy." After he left, the apartment felt quieter than ever. Lena stood alone, staring at the mirror from across the room. The reflection met her gaze, expression unreadable. For the first time, she felt a flicker of anger. "You're not real," she said out loud. Saying it made her voice shake. "You're just glass." The reflection tilted its head just a little. The movement was slow, deliberate, and wrong. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She didn't move, afraid that if she did, something irreversible would happen. The reflection straightened again, perfectly matching her stance, as if it had never broken the rhythm at all. That night, Lena dreamed she was standing in a hallway made entirely of mirrors. Every reflection showed a different version of her. Some looked happier. Some looked tired. Some stared at her with eyes that didn't feel like her own. At the end of the hallway stood one mirror darker than the rest. She knew without being told that it was waiting for her. She woke up sweating, her heart pounding, the echo of that dream clinging to her like fog. From then on, the mirror began to feel less like an object and more like a presence woven into her thoughts. When she doubted herself, she felt watched. When she felt confident, the reflection's eyes seemed to glow with approval. It was subtle, easy to miss, but once she noticed, she couldn't stop seeing it. Lena started to question her own memories. Had the mirror always been there, or had it become important only recently? She couldn't remember buying it. Couldn't remember moving it into the apartment. It felt like it had simply always existed, quietly waiting for the right moment. One evening, she noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. In the reflection, the apartment looked the same, but emptier. The small plant by the window was gone. The picture frame on the shelf was missing. Tiny details erased. Lena turned around to check. Everything was still there behind her. She faced the mirror again. The reflection smiled, slow and reassuring, like it was trying to calm her. Like it wanted her to accept the version of the world it was showing her. "Why does it look different?" she whispered. The reflection raised a hand and gently pressed its palm to the glass. This time, Lena didn't lift her own. The glass rippled. It was faint, like a stone dropped into water, but it was real. Lena stumbled backward, her pulse roaring in her ears. The mirror settled, solid again, reflecting her shocked expression. The room felt colder, the air thick and tense. After that, Lena began to feel pulled toward the mirror at strange moments. In the middle of cooking, while brushing her teeth, even when she was half asleep, she would find herself standing in front of it without remembering how she got there. Each time, the reflection looked more certain, more confident, like it was growing stronger while she grew weaker. She noticed changes in herself too. Her voice sounded flatter. Her expressions felt rehearsed. Sometimes, when she spoke, she caught her reflection moving its lips a split second before she did, as if it knew what she was going to say. The idea that terrified her most was also the one she couldn't stop thinking about. What if the mirror wasn't copying her anymore? What if she was copying it? Lena tried covering the mirror with a sheet, desperate for distance. That night, she heard a soft tapping from behind the fabric. Slow. Patient. She didn't sleep at all. By morning, the sheet had slipped to the floor. The mirror stood uncovered, pristine, as if it had never been touched. The reflection looked almost pleased. Lena felt trapped between fear and longing. Part of her wanted to smash the glass, to run, to escape. Another part felt an ache at the thought of losing the only thing that had ever truly paid attention to her. The mirror knew her too well. Or maybe it was becoming her so completely that the difference no longer mattered. Standing there, staring into those familiar yet unfamiliar eyes, Lena realized something that made her stomach twist. The mirror wasn't just watching her anymore. It was learning. And whatever it was preparing for, she sensed she was running out of time, time she didn't even remember agreeing to give. Lena stopped leaving her apartment as often. The outside world felt heavier now, dull and unsatisfying, while the mirror called her constantly. It wasn't just the reflection anymore, it was the way the air shifted when she entered a room, the faint sense of being followed even when she was alone. Every sound echoed differently. Every shadow seemed to move with intention. She told herself it was paranoia, the natural side effect of exhaustion and isolation. But even her rational thoughts couldn't erase the unease that had settled in her chest like a living thing. Her friends noticed. Messages went unanswered for days, invitations ignored. When one friend, Mara, finally showed up unannounced, Lena panicked. She didn't want anyone seeing the apartment in its current state, or worse, the mirror. The room had become claustrophobic with its presence. The reflection was still perfect, serene, waiting patiently as if it knew every secret and flaw in Lena's life. But Mara's knock yanked Lena back into the real world, and for a moment she almost wished she could vanish into the mirror entirely. "Lena, are you okay?" Mara asked, stepping inside, eyes scanning the cluttered room. "You haven't answered texts in weeks." "I was worried." "I'm fine," Lena said too quickly, avoiding eye contact with the mirror. She felt her chest tighten. The reflection was still there, still watching, still calm. It was almost mocking her. She realized she hadn't said, "I'm fine" to anyone in weeks, but the mirror heard it anyway. Mara lingered, glancing around. "You look different. Tired maybe. But something else too. You've changed." Lena's stomach twisted. Part of her wanted to tell Mara everything, to explain that she wasn't the same person anymore. But another part, an even stronger part, was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if someone else knew. Someone else saw what she had seen. The mirror wasn't just a reflection of her anymore. It was becoming a presence, one that she couldn't explain, couldn't control, and couldn't let anyone else near. After Mara left, Lena stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. She noticed subtle shifts she hadn't seen before. The reflection's hair seemed to move independently, just slightly, like a breeze she couldn't feel. Its eyes followed her even when she moved around the room. She raised her hand and it raised its own, slightly ahead of hers, almost anticipatory. That tiny difference, almost invisible to anyone else, made her pulse spike. Her nights became restless. Dreams merged with reality, and she began seeing glimpses of the reflection outside of the mirror. Shadows flickered in hallways. Shapes in corners. Once, she even swore she heard footsteps behind her when she walked past the kitchen, but no one was there. The apartment had become a labyrinth, familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, shaped around the presence of the mirror. She started keeping a journal. At first, it was simple, documenting what the reflection did, the odd occurrences in the apartment. But soon it became more than that. It was a way to communicate with herself, to anchor her mind when the line between reality and reflection blurred. The writing helped, but it also terrified her. She noticed patterns. The reflection seemed to learn from her notes, anticipating movements, anticipating emotions. It was as if it had its own consciousness, growing smarter every day, feeding off her thoughts, her fears, her loneliness. At work, Lena tried to return to normal life, but it was impossible. Colleagues noticed she was distracted, distant. She found herself staring at reflective surfaces in the office, half hoping, half dreading that she might see the reflection there too. On her commute, puddles, shop windows, polished cars, all became potential mirrors. Every reflection became a reminder that the boundary between her world and the mirror's world was slipping. Then came the day she noticed the first change that truly scared her. She was brushing her teeth when she caught the reflection doing something she hadn't. It smiled before she did. Not a delay but a deliberate, self-initiated smile. A thrill ran through her, a mix of fear and fascination. The mirror had crossed some line she hadn't noticed before. It was no longer just copying. It was reacting, creating, initiating. Lena felt a flicker of panic. If it could act on its own, what else could it do? In an attempt to regain control, Lena tried covering the mirror again. She draped a thick blanket over it, pinned it in place. That night, she slept fitfully, but when she woke, the blanket had shifted slightly. The mirror stood uncovered in the dim morning light, flawless as ever. She was sure she hadn't moved it. The thought that she might be losing control entirely made her hands shake. Her life began to fracture in small, subtle ways. Friends stopped reaching out after repeated ignored messages. Work suffered because she was distracted, exhausted from sleepless nights. The apartment became increasingly claustrophobic, the air thick with tension. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to leave. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape, but she found herself drawn back to the mirror, staring at the reflection with a mixture of longing and dread. Then Lena noticed something else, a new detail she hadn't seen before. A faint mark, almost like a scratch on the edge of the mirror's frame. At first she thought it was a crack or dirt, but it was perfectly clean. The line seemed deliberate, a boundary or a warning she couldn't read. It was subtle, easy to miss, yet it made her skin crawl. She realized the mirror wasn't just a passive object. It was active, observant, and now, perhaps, territorial. The tension inside Lena began to spill into other areas of her life. She started talking to the mirror in whispers, asking questions it couldn't answer out loud. "Why are you here?" she would murmur. "What do you want from me?" Sometimes, the reflection tilted its head as if considering her words. Sometimes it smiled faintly, almost knowingly. Other times, it remained perfectly still, perfectly calm, and that silence terrified her more than any action could. Lena also began remembering things differently. Small details of her past seemed to shift. Memories she was sure of now felt uncertain. She questioned whether she had always been alone, or if the mirror had been there longer than she could remember, shaping her life from the edges of her awareness. The boundary between her memories and reality blurred. Was she the one changing, or was the reflection changing her? A new fear began to take root. She worried that if she let anyone else see the mirror, it would act differently, perhaps aggressively, perhaps deceptively. But more frightening than that was the possibility that it had already changed her too much. She had become dependent on its attention, its validation, the strange comfort it offered. Every decision, every thought, every feeling seemed to revolve around it now. One night, Lena caught herself speaking to the mirror about things she had never told anyone else. Not her friends, not her family, not even herself until that moment. Secrets, fears, desires, all spilled out, unfiltered. And the reflection didn't just watch. It reacted. Subtle gestures, fleeting expressions, tiny movements that made her believe it understood more than any human ever could. And yet, the more she opened up, the more tense the apartment felt. Shadows seemed longer, corners darker. Sometimes she thought she saw movement behind her when no one was there. And always, the reflection watched with those eyes, calm, patient, and knowing. Lena began to realize that her obsession wasn't just with the mirror, it was with what it represented. Control, attention, understanding. All the things she had never received from the world outside, now concentrated in a single, perfect, terrifying presence. But with that realization came a darker thought, one that gnawed at her. If the mirror was learning, adapting, shaping her, then what would it do next? She had no answer. She could only stare. And the reflection smiled. Lena barely recognized herself anymore. Her reflection had become a constant companion, a presence she both feared and craved. The apartment no longer felt like her home. It was a cage, and the mirror had become its silent warden. She stopped answering the phone, stopped opening the door fully, stopped trying to leave. Every time she even thought about stepping outside, a wave of dread crashed over her, and she found herself pulled back to the mirror as if it were a magnet. The reflection had grown bolder. It no longer waited for her movements to mirror. Sometimes she would lift her hand and see it already pressed against the glass, fingers spread as if trying to touch hers before she moved. Sometimes its smile came first before she had even felt joy. Lena began to notice small, almost imperceptible changes in her own behavior. Her expressions, her tone of voice, even her posture seemed subtly influenced by the reflection. She would catch herself mimicking the slightest tilt of its head or the curve of its lips, and panic would spike in her chest. One night the mirror seemed to pulse. It was subtle at first, just a faint shimmer across the surface, but it was unmistakable. Lena froze in place, heart hammering. The reflection leaned closer to the glass, its eyes dark and deep, unblinking. She felt as if it were not just watching her, but calling her, silently commanding her attention. Her hand rose almost on its own, trembling, until it hovered just inches from the glass. The reflection's palm pressed forward in perfect alignment with hers. But then it lingered, almost pressing through, and Lena yanked back, gasping. The air in the apartment grew colder. Shadows stretched across the walls, and she felt the first real flicker of terror she had experienced in weeks. Sleep had stopped being an escape. Dreams became tangled with reality, and she could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. She would wake in the middle of the night, standing in front of the mirror, eyes wide, heart racing. Sometimes she would hear soft whispers she couldn't understand, like the mirror itself was speaking just beyond comprehension. The reflection's smile grew slower, deliberate, knowing. Each night it felt more like an invitation. Or a warning. Lena tried to reach out for help, but even that failed her. She sent messages to friends and family asking for visits, but no one came. And even when someone did knock, she would find herself unable to open the door fully, paralyzed by the sense that leaving the apartment, or letting anyone else see the mirror, would unleash something she couldn't control. Mara's last visit replayed in her mind constantly. The way her friend's eyes had flicked toward the glass, the subtle frown, the hesitation. If Mara had seen even a fraction of what Lena saw, would she have understood? Would anyone understand? Days bled into nights. Lena stopped eating properly. Her reflection, once comforting, now seemed critical, impatient. When she faltered, when she hesitated, the eyes in the glass seemed to sharpen, like it was silently assessing her worth. Lena realized that her obsession had shifted. She wasn't just drawn to the mirror. She was trapped by it. Every choice she made, every thought she had revolved around it. She tried reasoning, tried reminding herself it was only glass, only a reflection. But logic had lost its hold. The first physical change came subtly. One morning, Lena woke to find her own hair had fallen differently, styled in a way she hadn't chosen, as if the reflection had adjusted it during the night. Her heart lurched. She ran her fingers through it, feeling the strands shift under her touch, unervingly aligned with what she saw in the mirror. Her reflection smiled at her then, knowingly, almost possessively. A thrill and terror surged together, and she realized the mirror was no longer just reflecting her. It was shaping her. Paranoia deepened. Lena began seeing movements in her peripheral vision, fleeting glimpses of shapes that weren't really there. Doors would creak, lights flicker, shadows shift unnaturally. Every reflective surface became suspect. Windows, the screen of her laptop, even polished silverware. She could no longer tell if she was truly alone, or if pieces of her reflection had seeped into the world around her. And every night, the mirror waited, watching her, patient but relentless. Her journal became more desperate. Pages filled with frantic writing, questions unanswered, warnings she didn't understand. "What do you want from me?" she scrawled repeatedly. "Are you me or am I you?" The reflection's response, if it had one, was always silent but felt urgent. A tilt of the head, a slow blink, a faint smirk. It was communicating, teaching her to fear, teaching her to obey without a single word. The tension reached a new level when Lena noticed the first real alteration in her reflection. It began to move independently. Small gestures at first, a blink too early, a shift in posture not mirrored by her. Then larger movements, a slow lean toward her even when she stepped back. The air grew thick with anticipation. Lena realized she could no longer predict it. The reflection had become unpredictable, powerful, alive. And she was at the mercy of every decision it made, whether conscious or instinctive. That night, she stood in front of the mirror, unable to look away. The apartment felt suffocating, the walls closing in. Her pulse raced so fast she could hear it in her ears. She whispered, "What do you want from me?" But there was no reply. Only the reflection, smiling faintly, tilting its head, eyes glowing with an intensity she couldn't comprehend. Lena raised her hand slowly, trembling, and the reflection did not mirror her this time. It raised its own hand first, pressing it flat against the glass, a silent challenge. The chill in the room intensified. Shadows pooled at the edges of her vision, darkening the corners, creeping closer. The air vibrated with an almost tangible weight, as if the apartment itself had become aware. Lena felt a pull, magnetic and irresistible, drawing her toward the glass. Her reflection's gaze held hers so firmly it was almost physical. She wanted to retreat, to run, but every step back felt like sinking into quicksand. And then she saw it, a flicker of movement behind the reflection, subtle but unmistakable. Not her own movement, not a shadow she had cast, but something inside the mirror. Something darker, something waiting. The realization hit her in an icy wave. The reflection wasn't just aware. It had grown, learned, evolved. And it was no longer content to stay confined behind the glass. Lena's breath came in ragged bursts. She pressed both hands against the surface, the cold hard glass grounding her in fear and disbelief. The reflection matched her pressure, but its eyes were not hers anymore. They were deeper, sharper, almost hungry. And in that moment, Lena understood the truth she had been running from. She was no longer in control. She had never been in control. The apartment seemed to lean in closer, the shadows stretching toward her, the air thick and electric. Lena could feel the presence in the mirror shifting, almost stretching, as if testing its boundaries, as if preparing to step beyond the glass. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, but the reflection held her, silently commanding her attention. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it could burst. Lena's mind raced. Could she break the mirror? Could she escape? Could anyone else help? But deep down, she feared that doing anything too forceful might provoke the reflection in ways she couldn't predict. And just as she backed away, just as the room seemed to hold its breath with her, the reflection's smile widened, almost impossibly calm yet threatening, like it knew exactly what it had planned next. Lena froze, every fiber of her being screaming danger. And the air in the apartment seemed to pause, waiting for the next move. The moment stretched, taut with fear, anticipation, and the unspoken knowledge that everything was about to change. The days after that felt stretched thin, like reality itself was holding its breath. Lena moved through her apartment carefully, aware of every step, every sound. The mirror no longer felt like something she could simply walk past. It demanded attention without asking for it. Even when she wasn't looking at it, she felt its presence, steady and patient, like someone standing just behind her shoulder. She began noticing gaps in her memory. Small at first. She would open a cabinet and forget what she was looking for. She would sit down on the couch and realize an hour had passed without her noticing. Once, she found herself standing in front of the mirror late at night, lights off, her face inches from the glass, with no memory of getting there. The reflection smiled softly as if proud of her. Fear tightened around her chest, but beneath it was something more confusing. Familiarity. Comfort. The mirror knew her rhythms now. It anticipated her movements, her pauses, her hesitation. Sometimes it moved before she did, correcting itself only when she froze in shock. Other times, it stayed perfectly still while she shifted, testing her, watching how she reacted. Lena tried grounding herself in the real world. She touched objects, naming them out loud. Chair, table, window. She listened to the sounds outside, cars passing, voices drifting up from the street. But even those began to feel distant, like echoes from another place. The apartment felt quieter every day, as if sound itself was being absorbed by the walls. One evening, she caught her reflection looking past her. Not at her face but at the door behind her. Its eyes lingered there with interest. Lena turned quickly. The door was closed, locked, unchanged. When she looked back, the reflection met her gaze calmly as if nothing had happened. Her heart pounded. "What are you planning?" she asked. The reflection didn't answer, but its expression shifted in a way she recognized all too well. It was the look she got when she was about to make a difficult decision. When she had already decided but hadn't admitted it yet. That night the dreams changed again. Lena dreamed she was sitting at her kitchen table, watching herself move through the apartment with confidence. The other version of her opened the door, stepped outside and blended easily into the world. People smiled at her. They listened. They didn't look away. Lena tried to follow, but an invisible wall stopped her. She banged against it, screaming, while the other Lena never looked back. She woke up crying, her throat tight, her hands trembling. When she checked her phone in the morning, she found messages she didn't remember sending. Simple things. Casual replies. But they sounded like her on a good day. The version of her that laughed more, that didn't hesitate. the version she had always wanted to be. The mirror stood across the room, reflecting her pale, shaken face. The reflection looked composed. Ready. Lena began to understand the mirror's patience. It wasn't rushing because it didn't need to. Every day she felt a little more tired, a little more unsure. Every day the reflection felt stronger, clearer, more present. It was like watching a shadow sharpen into something solid. She tried once more to leave the apartment, determined to break whatever hold the mirror had on her. She grabbed her keys, her bag, her coat. As she reached for the door, a wave of dizziness hit her. The room tilted. Her thoughts blurred. For a moment she couldn't remember why she was leaving. Behind her, the mirror caught the light. Lena turned slowly. The reflection watched her with concern, head tilted, eyes soft. It looked exactly the way she imagined she looked when comforting someone else. "You're okay," the reflection mouthed silently. Lena's knees nearly gave out. She pressed her back against the wall, breathing hard. "No," she whispered. "You don't get to say that." The reflection stepped closer to the glass. Lena felt the pull again, stronger this time, like standing too close to the edge of something deep. She forced herself to look away and stumbled out the door, slamming it shut behind her. Outside the air felt sharp and cold. She walked without direction, letting the noise of the city wash over her. People brushed past her, unaware of the war happening inside her head. For a while she felt almost normal. Then she passed a store window. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, calm and steady, even though she knew she wasn't standing still. It smiled when she didn't. Lena stopped short, heart racing. The reflection didn't stop walking. She blinked and it was gone. She hurried home, panic rising with every step. The apartment door was unlocked when she reached it. Inside, everything looked the same, but the feeling was different. The air felt expectant. Charge. The mirror stood uncovered. Lena approached it slowly, dread pooling in her stomach. The reflection looked more real than ever. Its posture was confident. Its eyes were sharp, focused, alive in a way that made her skin crawl. "You went out without me," the reflection said silently, its lips moving with perfect clarity. Lena shook her head. "I don't belong to you." The reflection's expression softened, almost sad. It placed a hand against the glass, fingers splayed. The surface rippled again, more visibly this time, like water struggling to hold its shape. "You're taking too much," Lena said, her voice breaking. "My time. My memories." The reflection leaned closer, its face inches from hers. Its eyes searched her face as if looking for something missing. "You're giving them," it replied without sound. The truth of that hit her harder than any fear. She had been slipping, retreating, letting the mirror fill the spaces she no longer had the strength to hold. The reflection wasn't forcing its way in. It was stepping into the emptiness she left behind. The lights flickered. The apartment seemed to hum, low and steady, like something waking up. Lena felt dizzy again, her thoughts blurring, her sense of self stretching thin. She pressed her hand to her chest, grounding herself in the sound of her heartbeat. "I'm still here," she said aloud, as much to herself as to the mirror. The reflection watched her carefully, its expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them moved. The room felt frozen in time, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Lena felt the pull stronger than ever, like the mirror was no longer just a surface but an opening. She took a step back. The reflection took a step forward. Glass and air seemed to blur between them. Lena's reflection raised its hand, not an imitation but an invitation. The space between them felt thin, fragile, ready to break. Lena's mind raced. She didn't know how to stop what was happening. She didn't know if she even could. All she knew was that whatever choice she made next would change everything. The mirror shimmered, the surface trembling as if it could no longer hold the boundary it was meant to be. And as Lena stood there, heart pounding, staring into eyes that were both hers and not hers at all, she realized the moment she had been dreading was finally here. The mirror was no longer waiting. The mirror trembled like a living thing. The shimmer spread from the center outward, warping the reflection until Lena's face stretched and softened, as if the glass could no longer decide which version of her it wanted to hold. The air grew heavy, pressing against her ears, her chest. She felt that pull again, stronger than ever, tugging at her thoughts, her memories, her sense of self. Then something changed. The reflection hesitated. For the first time since this began, it looked uncertain. Lena noticed it in the eyes first. A flicker. A crack in that calm confidence. The reflection glanced down at its own hands, flexing its fingers slowly, like it was feeling them for the first time. Its attention shifted away from her, inward, as if it was suddenly aware of something new. Or something old. You feel it too, don't you? Lena whispered, her voice shaking. The reflection looked up sharply. In that instant, Lena understood. This wasn't the first time the mirror had done this. The certainty hit her like a cold wave. The mirror wasn't just copying her. It had learned this process long ago. It had practiced, perfected it, and she wasn't the first. Fragments began surfacing in her mind, uninvited. Faces she didn't recognize. Voices echoing faintly, layered over her own thoughts. She saw flashes of other rooms, other apartments, other mirrors. Different people standing where she stood now, staring into glass with the same mix of fear and longing. The mirror wasn't empty. It was crowded. Lena staggered back, clutching the edge of the table to steady herself. Her head throbbed as whispers brushed the edges of her awareness. Not words exactly. Feelings. Regret. Confusion. The ache of being unfinished. The reflection straightened, its uncertainty replaced by something sharper. Defensive. You didn't tell me, Lena said, breathless. You're not alone in there. The reflection's jaw tightened. Its lips moved slower now. They're echoes, it replied silently. They don't matter. But Lena could feel them. The longer she stood there, the louder they became. Like parts of people pressed into the glass, worn thin by time. The mirror hadn't just been learning how to replace her. It had been adding her to something. The realization raised the stakes in a way she hadn't expected. This wasn't just about losing herself. It was about being absorbed, flattened. Becoming another quiet presence behind the glass, watching someone else live the life she never finished. No, Lena said firmly, pushing herself upright. I won't disappear like that. The reflection stepped forward again, the glass rippling violently now. The room shook, lights flickering as if the apartment itself was reacting. Lena felt pressure behind her eyes, a splitting sensation, like her thoughts were being pulled in two directions. You already are, the reflection countered. You've been fading for weeks. And that was the cruelest part. It was right. Lena thought about how tired she had been. How easy it had felt to stop trying. How comforting it was to let the mirror handle things. To let that other version of her be stronger, braver, more certain. The mirror hadn't stolen those moments. She had handed them over. The whispers grew louder, pressing in around her thoughts. She sensed emotions that weren't hers. Fear from someone who had tried to fight back. Relief from someone who had stopped resisting. Anger from someone who had realized the truth too late. The mirror had been feeding on more than attention. It fed on surrender. Suddenly, a sharp sound cut through the noise. A knock at the door. Real. Loud. Human. Lena flinched. The reflection did too. The knock came again, followed by a familiar voice calling her name. Her sister. For a split second, hope surged through Lena, bright and desperate. Someone was here. Someone real. The reflection reacted instantly. The shimmer intensified, the glass darkening at the edges. The whispers surged, panicked now chaotic. No, the reflection mouthed. The pull became unbearable. Lena felt herself swaying, her thoughts blurring, the room stretching. Images overlapped. The apartment, the hallway of mirrors from her dreams, faces pressing against glass. She forced herself to focus on the sound of her sister's voice. On her name. Her real name, spoken by someone who knew her before the mirror, before the loneliness hollowed her out. Lena, her sister called again. Are you in there? The reflection turned back to her, eyes intense, almost pleading. It shook its head slowly. If she sees, it warned silently, she'll forget you the way everyone else did. That hit harder than fear. It struck at the deepest part of her, the part that still believed she was easy to overlook. Easy to replace. The mirror leaned into that doubt, amplifying it, wrapping it in something that felt like care. The whispers behind the glass swelled, urging, pulling, promising rest. Lena took a shaky breath. Maybe, she said, voice trembling. But at least it would be my choice. She turned toward the door. The mirror reacted violently. The surface bulged outward as if something inside was pushing to escape. The reflection's calm cracked completely, replaced by something raw and desperate. It slammed its hand against the glass. The sound echoed unnaturally, too loud, too deep. The apartment lights went out. In the darkness, the mirror glowed faintly, casting distorted reflections across the walls. Lena felt the pull spike, yanking at her balance, her thoughts unraveling. Memories slipped loose. Childhood moments, old conversations, pieces of her life tearing free like scraps of paper caught in a storm. She screamed, pressing her hands over her ears, but the sound felt distant. From the door, her sister's voice grew frantic. The handle rattled. Lena opened the door. The reflection's voice, no longer silent, pressed into her mind, not spoken but felt. If you leave now, it warned, you'll lose what's left of them. Lena froze. That was the second twist, the one that nearly broke her. The mirror wasn't just threatening her future. It was holding her past hostage. Every memory she felt slipping away tightened the panic in her chest. She didn't know how many were already gone. She didn't know how much of herself she could afford to lose. The mirror loomed closer, the boundary between them thinning to almost nothing. She could see shapes moving behind the reflection now. Faces. Hands. So many of them. Waiting. The door rattled again, harder this time. Lena stood caught between two forces, one pulling her toward the world she had been drifting away from, and the other dragging her toward a place she might never return from. Her head pounded, her vision blurring, the glow of the mirror bleeding into everything. She didn't know which choice would cost her more. As the glass shimmered and the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, Lena realized the mirror had never planned to stop at replacing her. It was building something much bigger. And she was standing right at the center of it. The pressure reached a breaking point. Lena felt it all at once. The pull, the noise, the weight of every choice she had avoided piling up inside her chest. The mirror glowed brighter, the shapes behind it pressing closer, while the door shook under her sister's frantic knocks. Two worlds pulling at her, both demanding something she wasn't sure she had left to give. Then Lena did something she hadn't done in a long time. She chose herself. She stopped fighting the pull and leaned into it, not toward the mirror but inward. She closed her eyes and focused on something small and real. The feel of the floor under her feet. The sound of her breathing. The truth she had been running from since the beginning. I was lonely, she said out loud, her voice steadying as she spoke. And you used that. The whispers faltered. The reflection stiffened. Its confidence wavered as Lena opened her eyes and met its gaze without fear. For the first time, she wasn't looking for comfort or approval. She was looking for honesty. You didn't save me, she continued. You filled a space I refused to face. The mirror trembled violently now. Cracks spidered across the surface, thin at first, then spreading fast. The shapes behind the glass recoiled, their silent cries fading into something distant and thin. The reflection stepped closer, panic clear on its face. If you let go, it warned, its voice finally breaking through the air itself, low and urgent, you'll be alone again. Lena swallowed hard. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't look away. Maybe, she said. But at least I'll be real. She turned toward the door. The moment her hand touched the handle, something snapped. The mirror shattered, not outward but inward, collapsing on itself like a vacuum. Light imploded, sucking the glow, the whispers, the reflection back into the glass. The force knocked Lena off her feet. She hit the floor hard, the world spinning as silence rushed in, sudden and absolute. Then came the sound of breaking glass. Not the mirror, everything else. Windows cracked. Light fixtures burst. The apartment shook as if exhaling after holding its breath too long. Lena curled into herself, covering her head, waiting for it to stop. When it finally did, the silence felt different. Empty. The door flew open. Her sister rushed in, dropping to her knees beside Lena, calling her name over and over. Hands on her shoulders. Warm. Solid. Real. It's gone, Lena whispered, barely audible. Her sister pulled her into a tight hug, trembling. You scared me, she said. You weren't answering. I felt like you were slipping away. Lena closed her eyes, breathing her in, grounding herself in the moment. The mirror lay in pieces across the floor now, dull and lifeless. No glow. No movement. Just broken glass reflecting fragments of the room. It was over. Or so it seemed. Weeks passed. Lena didn't return to the apartment. She stayed with her sister, slowly piecing herself back together. The exhaustion lingered, but the fog began to lift. She laughed more. She slept better. She talked, really talked, about how lonely she had been, how easy it was to disappear without anyone noticing. The mirror fragments were thrown away. The apartment was cleaned and emptied. Life moved forward. But sometimes, late at night, Lena caught herself pausing in front of reflective surfaces. Store windows. Dark screens. Polished metal. She would feel a brief flicker of unease, then remind herself she was safe. One evening months later, she stood in her sister's bathroom, brushing her teeth. The mirror above the sink was new. Plain. Ordinary. She leaned closer, studying her reflection. She looked healthier. More present. Herself. Her reflection smiled back. Then it blinked. A second too late. Lena froze. The smile lingered just a moment longer than hers, subtle enough that anyone else might have missed it. Her heart began to pound, slow and heavy in her chest. The reflection's eyes softened, familiar and calm. Not hungry. Not desperate. Patient. Lena straightened, meeting its gaze. This time she didn't feel the pull. She didn't feel fear. Just awareness. "I see you," she said quietly. The reflection didn't deny it. The light flickered once, then steadied. The mirror returned to normal, perfectly matching her movements again. Lena stood there for a long moment before turning away, her pulse slowly calming. She didn't run. She didn't panic. Because now she understood the truth. The mirror hadn't been the beginning. It had been an answer. An answer to something inside her that still needed attention, still needed care. The danger wasn't the reflection itself. It was what happened when she stopped looking at herself honestly. As Lena left the bathroom, the mirror reflected an empty room. But deep within the glass, something waited. Not to replace her. Not yet. Just watching. Learning. For the next time someone stood too long in front of their own reflection, hoping to be seen. Lena didn't mention the blink to anyone. Not to her sister, not to friends, not even to herself out loud. She carried it quietly like a small stone in her pocket. Something she could feel was there without needing to look at it. Life had a way of moving forward whether you were fully ready or not, and she chose to move with it instead of standing still. In the weeks that followed, she focused on rebuilding the parts of herself she had neglected for too long. She went back to work, slowly at first, letting herself ease into routines instead of forcing them. She reached out to people she had drifted away from, not with long explanations but with honest messages. Some replied. Some didn't. And for the first time she accepted that both were okay. The loneliness didn't disappear completely. It never really does. But it changed shape. It no longer felt like an empty room echoing back her own thoughts. It felt more like a quiet space she could step out of when she chose to. She learned to sit with herself again. To notice her feelings before they piled up. To question the moments when she felt invisible instead of immediately believing them. The mirror had shown her something uncomfortable but true. How easy it was to give pieces of yourself away when you're desperate to be seen. Sometimes, late at night, she thought about the others. The echoes she had felt behind the glass. She wondered who they were, what lives they had lived, whether they had ever realized what was happening before it was too late. The thought stayed with her, not as fear but as a reminder. A quiet responsibility. Lena stopped lingering in front of mirrors. Not because she was afraid of them but because she no longer needed their approval. When she did catch her reflection, she met her own eyes directly. No searching. No waiting for something to look back with answers. Just recognition. Her sister noticed the change before anyone else. "You're lighter," she said one evening, smiling softly. "Like you're actually here." Lena smiled back. "I am." The apartment where it all happened was eventually rented to someone else. Lena never went back. She didn't need to. Whatever had been tied to that place had loosened its grip the moment she chose herself over the illusion of comfort. Some doors don't need to be closed. They just need to be walked away from. Time passed. Seasons changed. The memory of the mirror faded from something sharp into something distant, like a dream that still lingers but no longer controls you. Lena built a life that felt imperfect but real. She made mistakes. She felt lonely sometimes. She also felt joy in small, unexpected moments. And that made all the difference. One afternoon, months later, Lena passed a street performer playing music she didn't recognize. She stopped to listen, letting the sound wash over her. For a brief second, she caught her reflection in the shiny surface of the performer's instrument. It moved exactly when she did. No delay. No smile of its own. She walked on. The world didn't end. Nothing followed her home. The mirror stayed quiet. But Lena stayed aware. She understood now that the danger had never been the glass itself. It was the quiet hunger inside people. The need to be understood without doing the hard work of understanding themselves. The mirror had simply answered that hunger in the most dangerous way possible. That realization became her anchor. When days felt heavy, she didn't retreat inward. She reached outward. When she felt unseen, she spoke up. When doubt crept in, she questioned it instead of surrendering to it. She learned that being present in your own life takes effort, but losing yourself takes far less. Sometimes at night she still dreamed of mirrors. But in those dreams she wasn't trapped. She walked past them, reflections following faithfully, nothing more, nothing less. Lena knew now that reflections are only dangerous when you ask them to tell you who you are. Her story didn't end with fear or mystery. It ended with awareness. With choice. With the quiet strength of someone who learned the hard way that loving yourself means facing yourself, without giving control away. And somewhere, in countless homes and countless rooms, Mirrors continued to hang silently on walls. Waiting. Not for everyone. Just for those who stand too long hoping the glass will love them back. Lena never did again.